Oh, hey folks, welcome to a commentary for Jurassic World Dominion or Jurassic Park 6. We've finally made it to the final movie of the Jurassic era, the classic legacy era as it's known. Um, which basically means involving the story from Jurassic Park with Dodson and Malcolm Grant Sattler and all that and how the story has evolved over six movies getting to this point. Um, And for those of you out there that know me and this channel, you know that I've been doing commentaries for all the Jurassic movies over the past decade, where I just sit down on my own and give my own thoughts and perspective on these movies. For those of you out there who are willing to listen and maybe interested in what I have to say. So, yeah, this has been a long time coming, I think. I've waited a while to let the dust settle before doing this because Jurassic World Dominion came out. And then the extended edition came out on Blu-ray, and that is the version that I'm going to be watching today, the extended 4K version. Um, so if you want to follow along with the commentary, please put your Blu-rays in now. Pause it right at 0000000, which is where I've got it. And then when I say 3, 2, 1, play, you can press play with me and we can watch it together. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, and play. Okay, I'm seeing the Universal logo come up. Now, this movie obviously packs a lot into it. There's a lot to say about this film. And, my old commentaries that I've done for like Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, even the older Jurassic movies. Um, I have listened back to a couple of bits of those, not all of them, but I listen in and then I'm like, okay, well, I don't agree with that anymore. So things change over time. New perspectives, new things come to light, and so I might say things in this commentary that I don't agree with in the future. But here we are, right at this point in 2023, May of 2023. Uh, yeah, these are my thoughts on this movie. And we open up 65 million years in the past, and we see this giant insect land on the legs of this Dreadnoughtus. The CGI here is just fantastic. Although I will say it does kind of bug me that they use the Brachiosaurus noises for the Dreadnoughtus here. But that's a minor nitpick. This whole opening is just gorgeous, and I really like the sort of the cojones of Colin Trevorrow to just be like, yeah, we're just going to see dinosaurs back in the past, and obviously it's very fictionalized, so a lot of this is quite fantastical to like what real life was actually like, but the point is really hammering home is that you're seeing these creatures just in their natural habitats, just going about their business. There's no humans, no technology, nothing like that. We get our first introduction to like feathers on dinosaurs with the oviraptor here, which just looks fantastic. And it's kind of like you know, fantastical and doesn't really. No, it's like a dream, isn't it? It's not necessarily meant to be one for one to our reality. But in the Jurassic universe, it has its own kind of like paleontological history that it's fictional and made up. So kind of fits that. And here we see the Giganotosaurus. That design, I just love the design of the Giga. It just looks so horrendous in a good way. And here we see the classic Tyrannosaur sporting some fuzz. It's funny that like obviously Jurassic Park 3 came about and had the introduced the sort of big theropod fight between the T-Rex and the Spinosaurus and killed the T-Rex. And whether you like or hate it, it wasn't necessarily looked at as a very wise decision in the long run. Um, I don't mind the fight myself. I just think it may be a little bit short and could have been a bit cooler. Maybe could have been saved till the end or something. But um, I do like that this film, obviously, it's the third in this new trilogy, just kills the T Rex within like the first 2 minutes of the movie. And then we cut to 65 million years later, so we're in the future now, and we see that very T Rex running through the forest, being chased by this Department of Fish and Wildlife. I got eyes on the animal. And this whole sequence is just fantastic. Like it's so cool, and I love that there's like kind of this. It is almost like that scene from Twister, where the F5, I think it's the F5, isn't it, or F4 at the time, before it evolved into an F5, comes through the drive-through cinema. I mean, all the cars and all the vehicles, there's very deliberate choices in like the vehicles look very 90s. There's some modern cars and stuff, but this whole sequence, yeah, looks like it's straight out of the 90s. The CGI on this T Rex is just monumental. It looks so cool. And it's nice just to see the T Rex wandering. Like it's not hunting. It's just obviously it's on the run from this helicopter. It's distressed, but it's like it's not you know trying to eat people all the time or anything. It's just wandered through this drive-through and caused all this you know horrendous carnage. Now we see the big Jurassic logo fly over us, and that is one thing that I wish. And this is kind of like a cosmetic thing, but I kind of wish the title Jurassic World Dominion was at the beginning of this movie because it kind of does the thing where you only see it at the end during the credits, and for me, it kind of sucks. We have this piece, which I know they have to have sponsorships with like now this, but it would have been nice if they'd made some sort of like fictional in universe sort of reporting. I'm obviously talking over loads of details here. This is what Dino Tracker, the viral marketing website that I worked on, was sort of promoting this idea of like dinosaurs are out in the wild, they're being spread across the world. They don't really have much control over people breeding and cloning and all that sort of stuff. Um, and so the world that this story takes place in is one of the genetics are out. Like everyone's got the use of it. And so the governments around the world have all agreed that, Biosyn, who's been hiding in the shadows over the past decade, no one really knows what they've been doing. But they've finally come out of the woodwork when obviously everything goes global and they're trying to now become top dogs off the back of InGen's mistakes, basically. So yeah, there's a lot of people who complained about this movie not being about dinosaurs on the mainland, where it's like, well, it is. It's about how they deal with them, and how they deal with them is they capture them and they ship them to Biosyn. Um, Now, obviously, I would have loved like some sort of Twister-esque road movie where they're on these jeeps going around the countryside capturing wild dinosaurs and that. But then it's like, but what's the actual story there? And I really love the story that this film tells. Each movie, especially with the viral marketing that we worked on, we presented the world that the story is going to take place in. So obviously, with the Jurassic World viral marketing website, you had the park, the interactive map website, and the Masrani Global website was setting up the company and how that park even managed to become a reality. dinosaur protection group comes along and it introduced the dilemma: do we go and save them and all that, and the volcano. And then the story is actually about the auction at Lockwood. That's the main story. And in Jurassic World, the main story is the hybrid. And none of that's really explained on the websites, of course, because they're just setting up the world. And Dino Tracker was doing the same thing. It was setting up that, dinosaur breeding is anyone's business now, not just InGen's. And so then this story about, kidnapping and this locust epidemic comes off the back of it. We'll get to the locusts, don't worry. As we see here, like people talking about that the film didn't, and I'm probably going to rag on about this quite a lot during this movie because that's one of the biggest complaints I see, and I think it's not justified. But like we're seeing right now, this whole scene with Claire's ear and Franklin rescuing this baby Nasutoceratops from this illegal breeding farm. This is a repercussion of what happened in Fallen Kingdom. We're seeing an illegal breeding farm, and they're dealing with it. People talk about these movies wanting to be a certain way, and I could be wrong here. I could be completely straw manning the position, but I'll say it anyway, and people can correct me if I'm wrong. But like, I get the sense that they want like more, and it's like, well, then how much more? Like, how what gets sacrificed? There's an ebb and flow to like what goes into the story, what goes out, and for me personally, and I know there's many people out there who might think I'm a bit biased, which I am to a certain extent, but like I like the story they tell with the locusts and the kidnapping of Maisie and Beta and all what Dodson's doing, and I love all that. So the fact that it's set in a world where we see this, like all these ceratopsians being kept in a illegal breeding farm out in some field somewhere, like that's just the world around them, you know. It's kind of like saying that, you wish Jurassic Park was a movie about John Hammond's acquisition of Isla Nublar. And it's like, no, no, Isla Nublar is just the setting where Jurassic Park takes place. you know, Learning about the history of how he actually got that island is like a couple of lines here or there. You know, you can see the construction. There's like some visual aids, and this same thing here. It's like the visual aids here is we see that there's illegal breeding farms, there's dinosaurs all over the world. Oh, and I just want to make note here that you can see the blanket that baby Nasutoceratops is wrapped in is like this blue checkered one. Just take note of that blanket for a second. I'll come back to that in a minute. And we cut to the Sierra Nevada mountains and this herd of Parasaurolophus being chased by Owen Grady and his friends from the Department of Fish and Wildlife on horseback. And this is just, in my opinion, this is kind of instantly iconic imagery. Obviously, I love this because it's inspired by Valley of Gwangi, the old dinosaur movie. And I've got a real soft spot for Owen Grady's character. I think he's just a awesome character. Um, and that doesn't mean I'm saying that he's some like deep and really philosophical character. Nothing like that. He's he's an action man. He's more boots on the ground, and I like that. I mean, I think there's cleverness in that in its own respect, in its own right, should I say? You know, like he's like just the modern Indiana Jones. So so like he is the best Indiana Jones esque character there's been since Indiana Jones, in my opinion. Although this scene could have been made a little bit better had they given him a cowboy hat, like they did in the concept art. It's just really like the visuals, the differences between the movies, like this one being set in the snow for a lot of the opening of the movie. It's just yeah, such a visual treat and such a stark difference to what we've seen before, and I really appreciate it because it doesn't really lose that Jurassic edge to me. Like it still feels like obviously it feels like a Jurassic movie to me. Part of me was worried that we were going to lose that kind of feeling going to all these different settings around the world. But actually, I think Trevorrow did a phenomenal job retaining the feeling of the Jurassic-ness, as it were. Now, yeah, I do wish there was some explanation as to like what they were doing with this one or what happened to the other ones, the other Parasaurolophus. My assumption is that they only needed one for testing for that kind of thing, like to find out where it came from, perhaps, and then you know they know the territory of the other ones or something like that. I do wish there was a little bit of dialogue that explained that, but not exactly crucial. Now we're introduced to Rain Delacourt. He's a real sleaze bag. Just love like just looking at what I'm seeing on screen as as a fan who first saw the Jurassic Park in the cinema when I was 4 years old in 1993, and then growing up with the other movies. They're all on these islands and stuff. To see this and to see people on horseback holding shotguns towards each other, exchanging a dinosaur that they've captured to be sold on the illegal black market for bone powder or whatever's going on. I don't know. It's such so refreshing to see, and it could have very easily not worked, but the way Trevorrow and Connolly and Marshall crafted these movies over the past decade, it's really justified in my opinion, and comes across really, really well. It's so different. That's one of the things I think these movies are going to stand the test of time. And I say that at a time where Fallen Kingdom and this one, and even Jurassic World to a certain extent, you know, are getting a lot of flack from a lot of people. The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 got the same, and they still do to a certain extent. So I'm used to like being on the opposite kind of opinion to uh, the consensus around these movies. Um, there's a lot of, especially knowing the behind the scenes of these movies, these newer ones. There's so much I appreciate with them that yeah, I don't know, like little scenes like this, for example, like Maisie going into this fishing shop from this guy with this lady going, "Shouldn't you be at school?" Like this scene was cut from the theatrical version because obviously it's not exactly needed, but it's just nice. Like it's nice to see this like little interaction and just to build out the world a little bit. And Maisie is one of my favorite characters of the entire franchise. Definitely my favorite kid character from the movies because she's got so much going for her as a character. She's got I just love her, you know, history, the fact that she's a clone. You get the sense in this scene that she's looking at this Apatosaurus There's a look in the actress's eyes that you can see that she's thinking, everyone around here, no one around here knows that, I've caused all this. The CGI in that Apatosaurus looks so good when it's turning its head like that. Now, I don't know if Trevorrow meant this, but I get the sense that this scene a little bit was inspired by the Flintstones. You've got this like logging factory, which is almost like the mining factory in the Flintstones, and then you've got these two long necks, kind of like the one that Fred Flintstone was working on. I know, I just I just get that sense. Now you can see, look, there's that blanket that Claire had wrapped the baby Nasutoceratops in, and she's burning them. And Maisie makes a comment here where she's like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, burning old blankets." Or, "What are you burning?" she says. Yeah, there you go. Claire says, "Oh, nothing, just some old blankets." So that's a really important little detail here that Claire is hiding illegal, her activity of going to stop the illegal breeding farms and do all that work. She was hiding that from Maisie. It's a little tiny detail that I don't hear anyone else really talk about, or I haven't had anyone else talk about. They're just burning old blankets. It's like Maisie just finds that a bit like, okay, whatever. But the reason Claire's doing it is because it's got all evidence on it to do with dinosaurs, capturing them. And she doesn't flat out just tell Maisie what she's doing. And that does, you know, they know what Owen's doing because when he comes back, he says, like, or Maisie says, you smell like horses. Unless I'm reading into it too much and maybe Claire isn't hiding it from Maisie, but maybe she just didn't want to tell her for whatever reason. But the fact that she's burning the blankets is quite telling that she doesn't want anyone to. Oh, well, it's also visual. It's a visual thing. She's giving up on her pursuit of saving the dinosaurs. She's moving on to try and be a mum, I guess. It is just nice to see Owen and Claire together again. Like, actually, they're just together now. And here we're introduced to Blue, who has found Owen and Claire and Maisie in their cabin. Blue being the sort of last, not officially out in the universe of Jurassic, but she is the last, in terms of the movies, link to the original raptors. She represents that breed of dinosaur, their intelligence. Obviously, Blue is an anomaly amongst those raptors because she's sort of hyper intelligent even amongst them. She's the only dinosaur that has sort of become a true character herself. I guess Beta by proxy as well, because people, name the big T Rex Rexy in the fandom and stuff like that, but she doesn't ever do anything really to make her an actual character. I guess maybe one would argue the final of this movie to a certain extent, but really, she's just doing what T Rexes do, whereas Blue has actively shown moments, especially in Fallen Kingdom, and in this one actually, when she sort of doesn't kill Owen, um, where Blue shows that she's got something else going on, which is willing to kill this man and his son, I presume, because they're shooting at Beta. I do like how serious um, the sort of Owen, Claire, and Maisie storyline is in this movie. Which is when I first saw it, I was taken aback by how the Grant, Malcolm, and Sattler story is actually a little bit more comedic. But that's because they're sort of past the traumatic part of their lives more, so they're a bit more jaded from that, but they've sort of come out the other side of it. And obviously, this movie they get thrown back into another adventure, whereas Owen, Claire, and Maisie are still in sort of the after effects of Fallen Kingdom. Like they're still feeling the trauma of it. Let's say part of me was stupidly convinced by some people in the fandom who were saying how Owen's, he's just like Quill from Guardians of the Galaxy, which is like they're totally different. They're more serious, but I sort of convinced myself that maybe the Owen Claire story would be a bit more, now they're together, a bit more like how they were in the first Jurassic World, where they were a bit more biting each other's heads off a lot, but and a bit more comedic. Like the whole like I'm in the Navy, not the Navajo, or whatever that whole scene was, kind of like that. Um, Whereas the Malcolm Grant and Sattler story was going to be more serious because they are the and they come from the classic movies. But it's actually the opposite, and I actually really like that because it actually works. I found that girl you've been after. Okay, so now we go to West Texas, which I believe is actually filmed in the UK, just outside London somewhere. And if you are a resident of the UK, you can probably tell if you look close enough. And we're introduced to the locusts, the hybrid locusts, which are, in my opinion, the best new thing added to this movie. Such out of left. I say out of left field. A lot of people didn't expect there to be a major story plot point involving giant locusts in this movie. Um, but Malcolm was signaling it from Fallen Kingdom. He says in Fallen Kingdom, genetic power has been unleashed, and what's going to be done with it? It's not going to stop with the de-extinction of the dinosaurs. And then that congressman's like, I'm not quite sure what you mean. And then Malcolm says, change is like death. You don't know what it looks like till you're standing at the gates. And so this radical change in the world has come about not through the de-extinction of the dinosaurs, but from a unpredictable place, which is the someone trying to control the food industry. Dodson. So I did find it quite ironic that there were many people out there who were like, "Oh, this locust plot didn't they didn't why didn't they set it up earlier?" Blah blah blah, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, that's chaos. That's what Malcolm's been talking about. You can't predict what's coming, and even from a filmmaking standpoint. And I think it was kind of a very, whether intentional or not, I think it's a genius move that Trevorrow did that because it is, as Malcolm says in Fallen Kingdom, it's a change and you can't predict what's going to happen. And so the whole locust plotline in this movie just perfectly maps onto that for me. It was a great follow up to what Fallen Kingdom was setting up with genetic power getting out. And also poetically, really. And I use that word lightly, but like everything rhymes. It's like poetry. Um, as George Lucas once said. Like the first movie, the dinosaurs are cloned via insects. The mosquitoes in amber, and then this sort of final movie in the Jurassic saga. It's the insects that are actually the problem, and no one could have seen that coming. Fantastic little animatronic locust. I'd love to own one of those. And this DNA thing, whether Ellie Sattler's using. Oh, by the way, yes, Ellie Sattler's back, and this does feel kind of like her movie. You know, she's the catalyst for getting Grant on board, and it's her. You know, Malcolm reached out to her. We see, like we just saw her doing her job a bit more, and it's like each sequel in the Jurassic Park trilogy. You know, The Lost World was Malcolm's movie. Jurassic Park 3 had Grant's movie. Sattler never had a movie, so it's nice that this one, despite Grant and Malcolm being in it, feels very much like this is Ellie's movie. And you know, I like that. I like the character. Grant being laughed at by a couple of, I don't even know what you'd call them, Gen Z idiots. Now, I need to clarify something here for those of you out there who know my opinions on something I've said I would change about Jurassic World Dominion had I been in creative control. But I've actually gone back on it and I need to explain. So, one of the things when I saw this film that I said I would change at the time was Grant's dig site is, you know, busy. There's lots of tents. There's lots of people working, as we can see right now on screen. And then Grant says to Sattler when they're in the tent here, he he says, "Well, the funding's all drying up." Or she says, "I've seen a lot of tourists come in," and he goes, "Well, the funding's dried up, so someone's got to pay for all this." And originally, I thought, you know, oh, they've done the bloomin' funding lack of funding at his dig site again, a third time, which is technically true. And I did say at the time that I kind of wished it was the opposite. You know, now dinosaurs are out in the wild, they're everywhere, that they could have written it, you know, to have Grant say that actually now everyone's interested in dinosaurs. So they're like, they've pumped loads of funding into this so we can learn more about these creatures that are living out there. And it's kind of like the opposite of what we saw in Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park 3. Because in Jurassic Park, you know, obviously Hammond wants to fund his dig site for a further 3 years and uses that as a way of baiting Grant and Sattler to Isla Nublar. And then in Jurassic Park 3, Grant says they've got like weeks before they have to pack up because there's no funding because everyone's obsessed with the dinosaurs out on the islands, not, you know, the ones buried in the ground. And then in this film, they basically repeat that. But I never clocked that tourists are paying for it. And so it makes sense that the government would give up because governments suck. Governments give up on funding the research into the actual animals that are now out there, but the public are interested. And the fact that Grant's dig site, it looks very popular, looks really expensive, and that it looks like he's doing really well for himself. Part of me does wish they did have a line of dialogue to like uplift that a little bit, but I actually kind of like how it is now in the movies. You know, someone's paying for all this. It's the public, the plebs. The plebs are funding the digging up of dinosaurs. It's just that then Grant has to deal with those little kids, and it is really cool to see these characters back again. And I really like this scene in the tent between Grant and Ellie. I think it's really well written, and they really do feel like they're characters. And that was one of the big things when, you know, before I saw this film, when Colin was pitching it to us, that I was really worried about. I was like, oh, are these actors going to be able to recapture their characters again? I wasn't so much worried actually about Jeff Goldblum and Ian Malcolm because I was worried before Fallen Kingdom, especially with Independence Day Resurgence. After seeing that, I was like, oh my word, please be all right. And he was actually really good. As brief as he was in Fallen Kingdom, he nailed it. He felt like Malcolm, and he felt like an evolved Malcolm. And then in this one, they all three of them just nailed it. Really, really nice to see. And obviously, as a fan, I just love seeing these characters back and and done well and done really well actually. So yes, these locusts are eating all the food supplies. They're going to cause an ecological disaster if they get too out of control, and they got to, find out who caused it and somehow put a stop to it. It's one of my favorite moments in the film, actually, when and he says, "I need someone that trust," and Grant's like, "Oh God," and then he goes, "How are you going to get into the Biosyn sanctuary?" Is what he's saying right now. How do you even get in there? And then she goes, "I got an invite from their in-house philosopher," and she slams the book down on the table, and there's Malcolm's smug face on the front of his book that just says "How the world will end." It's so good. It's so um exact to their characters and their relationships. Now, here's another important detail. Here we see the US Wildlife Relocation Facility in Pennsylvania, and people complaining about this movie not showing, people dealing with the dinosaurs out in the wild. What's this? Right on screen right now. You can see that the government are funding, Department of Fish and Wildlife to capture these dinosaurs and send them off to Biosyn Sanctuary. So one way they're dealing with the dinosaurs on the mainland is capturing them and relocating them, which is that's what you want, right? That's it. And obviously, we haven't even got to the Malta sequence yet, and other sequences where we see dinosaurs out in the wild. This is always one I see overlooked when people complain about that aspect of the movie being missing or not what's in the film. It's like, well, it is in the film. It's right here. It's the world they live in. You can see the actions of how people are dealing with the dinosaurs right here, and at the beginning with the illegal breeding farms, and Owen capturing the Parasol office. It's all in there. It's just the story. The actual core story is not necessarily about that. Although it is about the consequences of that. Blue and Beta being out in the wild, means Beta is easy to be captured, really, by poachers, people who are hunting dinosaurs because they're out in the wild, which is a follow up from Fallen Kingdom. I don't know. I'm gonna stop ranting. I just don't get that complaint. It's all about perspective, I guess. Here we see, yeah, Blue is looking at them, angry. Owen says, "If you don't, she'll think you're scared." And Maisie's like, "I am scared." And that comes into play later on, like way later on. So we'll come back to that in a bit. This is where things start to go wrong because obviously Owen's gone to investigate, Beta and Blue, and Maisie's pissed. So she leaves, and this is where Delacourt makes his move. There is this aesthetic to this movie, like a sort of cowboy-esque Western aesthetic to this whole beginning of this movie, which I really blend with because I've got an affinity for that kind of stuff. Frax Blue with the truck. They've got Beta. I just love this like rustic looking 4-wheel drive truck, and And they're leaning out of the window with the shotgun, a crashed school bus in the background. There's lots of cool sort of imagery here. And that's a very, I would say there's a kind of Kubrick-esque image there of that lady just stood on the bridge, and it's like looking kind of, well, very sinister. We see Delacourt throwing the bike in the water. It's a scumbag. That makes like they're trying to make it look like Maisie died, drowned in the river, and her body won't get found. Scum. No one opens this cabinet and pulls out his old trusty rifle that we saw in Jurassic World, which means he must have picked that up from the main street at Jurassic World before they left. Like, I think he dropped it there. It's the same though. He drops it here, and then we never see it again. And obviously, we wouldn't because they go on a global adventure. But it would have been nice had he been able to take it somehow and used it on his adventure. Maybe you can see kind of like the frustration in Blue's. Even though she's just a dinosaur, you can see like the frustration in her. You know, she's suppressing the instinct to just maul Owen and Claire to death, and she's upset that her baby's gone. Oh, look at this. Okay, so here you go, new incident report. So we can see this room here, how this is like the operations room at the CIA for how they're dealing with the dinosaurs being out in the wild. Again, building upon the premise of how people are dealing with dinosaurs out in the wild. Obviously, they mentioned the locusts here as well. So, despite being brief, all these little things add up, I think, to like build out that world, show how it's functioning. Obviously, this scene was meant to be Jake Johnson's character Lowry in the original version, but obviously, because of that horrible chicken truck disaster that happened that caused the world to go into shutdown for 2 years. Although this film filmed during it, it meant Jake Johnson couldn't do it, so they used Franklin, which I don't mind too much. They fit it in. You wouldn't really know unless you knew. So we see that there's Lowry. At least he gets his face in the movie somehow, you know. But Barry is French intelligence now, as Franklin says. Barry is one of my favorite characters. I just think he's really cool, and him and Owen, uh, you know, Colin Trevorrow tweeted out a picture of the old Super Nintendo game Jurassic Park 2 Chaos Continues, I think. And in that game, when you play two player, you play as this white guy and a black guy. And I swear to God, that's where Colin got the inspiration for Owen and Barry, or at least Owen having uh, a sidekick like Barry, a friend. Sweet little moment of Alan Grant and Ellie waking up on the plane. I think we're almost there. Yep. Biosyn Sanctuary, Dolomite Mountains, Italy. It's funny to think that, most of the Jurassic dinosaurs by the end of this movie are now in Italy. From Costa Rica to Italy. Who would have thought? And Ramsey Cole here is one of the best new characters they introduced in this film, along with Dodson, in my opinion. And, in terms of costuming, he's wearing a flowery shirt under his jacket, which is black. He's very much in black, kind of like Ian Malcolm. and that this kind of signifies that he's. I know the dinosaur man on Twitter made a thread about this recently. Um, but like you look at the costumes of the characters, they actually tell you a narrative. So Ramsey is working with Malcolm, so that's why he's dressed in black, but he's also going to sabotage Dodson's plans, much like Nedry did in the first film. So that's why he's wearing a flowery shirt like Nedry did. Obviously, Ramsey said that they acquired this land back in the 90s to get some amber, and the first generation of dinosaurs that arrived here were from Isla Sorna, and that's a key piece of information for the history of Biosyn and also the story. Because Sorna, especially during the Fallen Kingdom, people were like, "What happened to Sorna?" And obviously, we had answers on the viral marketing websites and stuff. But in the movies themselves, it was very much like, "What happened to him?" And you've got to think that in Fallen Kingdom, it's mentioned that Isla Nublar is believed to be the only place left on Earth where dinosaurs exist. And so, obviously, if the volcano erupted, they would go extinct. So, no one knew that Biosyn had been taking dinosaurs off Sauna secretly and putting them here. And Ramsey saying the first generation came from Sauna means that even though they bought these amber mines back in the 90s to try and make dinosaurs like InGen did, alluding back to like how Nedry was talking to Dodson at the cafe saying, your company's going to catch up on 10 years of research or whatever. You think like 10 years of research. So that's 1993. In the 80s, they've been doing research. Then early 90s, they try and steal stuff. And then they go, that fails. Then Dodson and crew are like, right, let's go to the Dolomite Mountains. We'll start making our own dinosaurs. We'll fish out the amber, all that sort of stuff. And they still don't make any dinosaurs. Like they still can't get it right. So they have to steal them from Sauna. It's a brief line, but the more you think about the wording and how it relates to the rest of the film series, it's why one of the reasons why I think these movies are actually really well written, because every word has meaning. Like knowing Trevorrow personally, I know that he picks words very specifically, and that's not to say he doesn't make mistakes or anything, but when it comes to that sauna line, I think that's genius because it's just like we bought these amber mines back in the 90s, and the first generation came from sauna. Means that the first generation of Biosyn dinosaurs weren't cloned from the amber that they were mining. So it already gives you a lot of intel into like what Biosyn's like. Anyway, here's Dodson being really awkward, and I think there's two layers to what's going on here. He's being awkward because you know he's well, he knows that he was behind the events that they went through in the first film, and no one knows that he was behind it all. And I do like that how this film ends. It's still a mystery for lots of people. But the fact that he comes up and he's putting on this show of, this sort of smart, intelligent guy, but he's got this air of like awkwardness to him, like he's nervous, and obviously as the audience we know his history. It just makes it really funny and really believable. It's like he didn't have to come out. Like they said, they didn't expect him to be there, but he comes out and he makes himself known. It's like he's trying to put on a friendly face, but he's like a bit on edge. Even Ramsey, if you look at Ramsey, the way he's reacting with Dodson in that sequence, you can tell that something's up. And here we are with Malcolm giving his lecture. And just like nuclear power, nobody knew what to expect with genetic engineering, but they pressed the button and hoped for the best. Just like you are doing now. That little point he does through this whole film is great. So the way Malcolm's evolved from where we last saw him in Fallen Kingdom. In Fallen Kingdom, he's this, like, he's got a beard. He's obviously been called to Congress to give, or this like Senate hearing or whatever, to like give his opinion on what should be done about the dinosaurs, because the public revere his opinion after the events of Jurassic Park, The Lost World. The fact that he was vindicated on being right on public TV about the dinosaurs being alive, gained public trust, all that sort of stuff is in the background of what's going on. Then in Fallen Kingdom, he gives this speech, which a lot of people, as you can see in the movie, are like, "What the heck is he talking about?" Because he's there to talk about the dinosaurs on the island, and he ends up talking about how there's an irreversible change that's already in effect and that they can't undo, and there's other problems coming that they can't see. And he's got this beard, and he looks a bit more like that he's maybe been in hiding for a little bit. Then we come to this one, 4 years later, the dinosaurs have gone global, and he is sort of reaping the rewards even more and showboating. But it's all a ruse. It's all he's there working with Biosyn, seemingly, helping Biosyn, which is, uh, you know, for Malcolm, he's like, "What are you doing?" But obviously, he's internally trying to sabotage, Biosyn's secret locust ploy. You can see Ramsey in the background here, following the characters. And it's all how they like build up, because at this point in the story, like, Ramsey is, suspicious. You're meant to look at him and be like, okay, he works for Biosyn. Obviously, later on, you find out that it was actually Ramsey who got in contact with Malcolm, who then got in contact with Ellie, who brought Alan on because they needed a witness. And so the fact, the way the film frames it, is like Ramsey's behind them walking, and they're whispering. They're obviously being quiet, and that it leads the audience to believe they're being quiet because Ramsey's there, but it's not. They're just being quiet because they want to be, you know, hush hush. I will say this, like, as funny as it is to see Grant being a bit jaded by this barista, I just, I don't like the barista. Pisses me off. Hey, his stupid little hat. No, in fact, he's talking about, "Oh, you want macchiato?" It's like, I think he's like a stand-up comedian in the UK or something, but just a bit irritating. I wouldn't have put that in there. Also, another reason why I really. Oh, we've got a siren. All right, pass. Hey, it wouldn't be a commentary on one of these movies without a siren from me. I think that's tradition. Anyway, as I was gonna say, the he's still going. The there are some people out there who have said that, I have a particular bias to these movies because I worked on them. And I want to clear some things up, because sometimes my love of these films comes from a comes from a place that even I didn't expect. Like Malcolm giving Ellie the wristband. I don't know why. Why, I do know, but kind of, I don't know why I made such a connection, but that wristband, even though it looks really nothing like it, reminds me of the wristband that had a bomb on it in an episode of Thunderbirds. I think it's called 30 Minutes After Midnight or something like that. An episode of Thunderbirds. It reminds me of that. And so I like the wristband keys in this film. Stupid little things like that. It just takes me back to my childhood of, like, when I was a kid, I locked onto these like metal wristbands they had in this episode of Thunderbirds, and so when I see the metal wristbands in this, it takes me back to being a kid again, and then I'm sort of, I can position myself into watching these as if I'm like 8 years old again, and that's why I tend to enjoy them. And here we see Doctor Wu and Dodson, and Wu is looking very Sad. He's beaten down. He's been through a lot. He's caused a lot. He's reflecting on his actions, and he wishes to seek some redemption. It's interesting that you get a little hint at like history between Wu and Dodson here. And so here's a going theory I have that Dodson was actually somewhat involved with the events of the auction at Lockwood Manor and Hoskins at Jurassic World. Maybe not directly, but you know, one of the sort of clues I think that gives this sort of link is Sonia Santos, who we're going to see in a minute at Malta, which is where we've just gone to now in the story. She has, oh, here she is, Sonia Santos. She has trained Atrociraptors who use the laser technology that Wu and everyone developed for the Endoraptor. So you get the sense that Wu had been working with Dodson earlier on, and and passed that technology from what they gathered at Lockwood and took it to Biosyn, and then obviously they've given that sort of technology and that knowledge to Sonya, and they've raised these Atrociraptors. Because at the end of Fallen Kingdom, you see Wu get dragged off by the mercenaries there, and the next time we see him is here. So it makes sense that there is a connection between Dodson's team and what was going on at the auction, and it's cleverly, I guess, woven into the background. And I say cleverly as in like again, it might not have been intentional, but it works. And I think that the fact that they don't beat you over the head with all these details makes these films, for me at least, more interesting to go back and watch, because you watch them and each time you notice a little detail that you're like, well, yeah, actually that's kind of interesting. I didn't think of it like that before. And whereas if they just kept beating you over the head with like exactly everything that's going on all the time with no questions asked or needed to be asked because they've just answered it outright, it make it boring. You'd watch it and you'd be like, okay, I got everything I need to know, and you'd leave. Whereas these films tend to have a little bit more going for them, especially when you look at like Fallen Kingdom and that, and you get to the biblical side of that movie and the Dracula side of it. There's a lot going on. This film has a lot of that too, with a lot of biblical references. Like the locusts, plagues, and the virgin birth with Maisie or whatever. Not saying Maisie is exactly like Jesus, but she does save the world with her genetics. But there is more going on, and then you've got all the like details, like when Dodson says, "What have we done before?" to Wu, and it's like, "Oh wait, you have been working together the whole time." But they don't just outrightly say it, and they have the characters speak in such a way that it's how like real life people would talk to each other. You wouldn't constantly give exposition all the time. It feels natural. And so when your characters are talking naturally, you enter a place like this sort of underground dinosaur market, which I must point out is also seeing the ramifications of what happened during the events of Fallen Kingdom. And we are literally now seeing a, well, people dealing with dinosaurs out in the wild. They're selling them, they're cooking these locusts and the lampreys or whatever they're called, that eel thing. They've got dinosaurs that we haven't seen before, cloned. They're fighting them, all this sort of stuff. It's like this is exactly what they were setting up with the world building at the end of Fallen Kingdom. Dinosaurs going global. We've seen them. We've seen government. Let's list it so far. So we've seen the governments capturing them and sending them to Biosyn so they can not be a menace to the public. We've seen illegal breeding farms. We've seen a montage of, the Mosasaurus attacking fishing boats and T Rexes walking through drive-in cinemas as they're trying to capture it. We've seen the veterinarian station before the government sends them off to Biosyn Sanctuary. Yeah, we see the place where they brush their teeth and look after them. And now we're in Malta and we're seeing, this dinosaur fight, like this Lystrosaurus biting the head off of a raptor, which is which is great. So violent. But yeah, like all this is seeing different reactions to dinosaurs being out in the wild. So again, I must emphasize, I do not understand why people say that it was kind of false advertising that Jurassic World Dominion was going to promise us dinosaurs out in the wild, and then they didn't show it. It's like they did. They shoot loads of it all over the movie. Anyway, it wasn't false advertising. It's just people just don't like the way it was like they executed it. I guess they wanted a different story. That's basically it. They wanted to see what they wanted to see instead of seeing what the director and writers wanted to, or the director and the writer, should I say, wanted to show you. It's kind of like I've been, not to go on too much of a tangent here, but recently I've been watching all the Rocky movies, a lot of them for the first time, and I never fully appreciated the one man's vision of that series, which is Sylvester Stallone, who directed most of the movies except for two of them, I think, three of them if you include Creed 3 now, and I know he didn't direct Creed 1 and 2, but I meant like the Rocky movies. But he wrote all of them and directed most of them, and it's like you get the sense that his vision, for good or bad, even if it goes down a path that you go, oh, I didn't really like that, you have to respect that it's like one person's vision, that that's what they wanted, the story they wanted to tell. And the Jurassic World trilogy is cut from that same cloth, because even though these are huge, massive budget studio movies, working with the director Colin personally and talking to him, like he told me and Tim Dominion's story pretty much word for word how we see it in this final movie. Before he'd even written the script, he sat us down to pitch us like what we want to do with Dino Tracker. Do the videos for that, and he said the story. He's like, yes, so we get Alan Grant and Ellie. They're dealing with this locust epidemic that's eating all the food, and it's they have to get Biosyn, and Malcolm's there, and you're like, oh, which side is he working for? And obviously in the final film, it's like a bit more on the nose because Ellie says Malcolm invited them. Um, and then Owen and Claire are dealing with Beta being stolen and Maisie being kidnapped, and they have to go to Biosyn, and it's like Lord of the Rings. You get these two different stories playing out, and you finally see when they meet, and describing the Giganotosaurus attacking the outpost. Like it was all in there. He explained everything, and so it is like seeing sort of massive budget one person's vision, and I really like it. I do kind of wish he got to, as much as I absolutely love J.A. Biona's directing in Fallen Kingdom, part of me does wish Colin had directed that movie, because then it would have been like his trilogy. He wrote Fallen Kingdom, but it would have been like even visually his like complete vision. Although I will say I think maybe Fallen Kingdom is a bit more visually rich in its um, symbolism, should I say? Anyway, we've got this huge action sequence I'm talking over where now we see Delacourt running away from Owen. He's throwing compies at him, and then Delacourt shoots these locks, and out comes this Carnotaurus and an Allosaurus. And I believe the Carnosaurus with the broken horn is the one from the end of Fallen Kingdom that the T Rex ate with Mills, which is again nice to see a returning dinosaur character. It's got the broken horn. I think it's the same one. And the Allosaurus, I don't think it's necessarily meant to be the one from Battle of Big Rock, but it's just an adult Allosaurus. It's just nice to see those two dinosaurs uh, together. And this knife fight that Owen and between Owen and Delacourt. And it's funny that they're in the fighting ring, where the dinosaurs were fighting. That's so cool. The Carnotaurus just roars at that guy and he falls into a fire. It's just, it's just absolute carnage. Something I do wish that happened here was like Owen was telling Maisie earlier, if you're in a knife fight, what something you should do is like you should let yourself get cut in a place that is not bad while you're cutting them in a place that is vital. He says something along those lines. And I do kind of wish that Owen, you saw a moment where Owen let Delacourt cut him there, and then he goes and does something. I guess maybe they didn't want to show people stabbing each other in a kids' movie. Maybe Sonia Santos releasing her Atrociraptors. I do like the Atrociraptors. I like how different they are to, the Velociraptors. Obviously, to sort of someone who doesn't really care, you wouldn't really notice too much of a difference between them. But as a fan, you can kind of see their like more boxy heads, the way their legs look a little bit longer. They really do look like they were built for this job in a way. And obviously, their sort of like colorations sort of reflect the classic raptors that we saw in the Lost World and Jurassic Park 3. And something I really really love about this whole Malta sequence is it is like you've just entered a different genre of movie, like a James Bond or a Jason Bourne type movie, Mission Impossible type deal. Uh, but it never loses its Jurassic feeling, in my opinion. It's kind of like Jurassic has genre hopped, but it hasn't lost the Jurassicness while it's genre hopping. It's a little bit like how at the end of The Lost World, we go to San Diego and you have like this kind of King Kong esque ending, this Godzilla type ending, but it never loses its Jurassic feeling. It's that exact same thing is what I'm trying to describe with how when I watch this Malta sequence, that's how it feels to me. I'm like, this still feels like a Jurassic story, but we're genre hopping. And that comes with the territory of going global and globe trotting, having the characters go to different locations. And it is also a nice way of looking at it when you think that, we cut between the legacy characters and Owen and Claire, which I would consider now Owen and Claire and that to be legacy characters, but because they're part of the same era where we've got Alan Grant, Ellie, and Malcolm. Um, but in terms of just this movie and where I am recording this in 2023, the legacy characters are Alan Grant, Ellie, and Malcolm, and the newer characters are Owen, Claire, and Maisie. And Owen and Claire's story is much more action orientated, and it is more serious. As I said, it has a bit more of an eerie, it's serious flair to it. But it's look at this. I mean, Claire's jumping from rooftop to rooftop with the Raptor. It's awesome stuff. It's really, really cool. Um, but yeah, a lot more action orientated. Where the Alan Grant, Ellie, and Ian storyline, will have its action moments coming up, but is more they're walking around, they're talking about what's going on and all that, which many Jurassic fans out there would agree that that is what people remember of the first film. They're having that dinner debate. They remember like Malcolm walking around the island with Tembo talking about, you know, or with Ludlow, sorry, talking about the ethics and the dilemma of what they're doing and all that sort of stuff. So each half of this film matches the sort of feelings that the characters bring and what people love about them. You know, the Trosseraptors just look so mean. It's a nice moment between Owen and Barry. Owen's like, do a last minute dive roll. Do you remember how we used to get the raptors in the truck? So it's like they used to do this. Like they used to just let the raptors run towards them and then do a last minute dive roll. It's like, what kind of practices were going on at Jurassic World? Nice to show a bit of like Owen's understanding of the animals. Like he can tell just by a look in their eyes, like when they're about to pounce. And I think the animators give the Atrociraptor like a little head twitch, like it twitches its head slightly to the side, which indicates it's about to go. So even us, the audience, get sort of a clue to what Owen sees. I will say this: I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but Claire was like, "They've took Maisie. She's on this side of the island," and they're all listening in on their earpieces. I remember watching the early cut of this film, and one of my notes to Colin was that I think I saw it a year before it came out. It was like it was this version of the film, the extended cut. I saw this. The sound and some of the effects weren't completed, but I remember saying to Colin that I don't like in these Marvel movies that they all like talk to each other, yet you can't see an earpiece or anything. They used to have like big radios or something in the old Marvel movies. It just kind of annoyed me. It was like when they made Iron Man's suit all like out of nanotechnology and it just became CGI instead of an actual practical suit and all that. Anyway, besides the point, I said to Colin, like, if you have a shot of them dishing out the earpieces, then I think that would make them communicating amongst each other across this whole sequence much more grounded and believable. Because at the moment, you can't see the earpieces in their ears, and it kind of comes across a bit like lazy, like you just if you don't acknowledge it. And Colin said, "Oh, we have like a 17-second long shot of Barry giving them earpieces." So I said, please put that back in the film. It's like a tiny detail, but it works. And lo and behold, in the extended cut of the movie, it's in there. So thank you, Colin, so much for doing that for me. It makes all the difference. Now look at this carnage. Poor guy getting eaten off that scooter. It's just great. I do kind of wish, though, that the Carnotaurus was the one who ate the guy off the scooter because the Allosaurus in this film got so many kills. What did it bite a guy, throw him into the Carnotaurus, then the Carnotaurus roared at a guy, he fell into the fire, and then another guy came over to help that guy who was on fire, and then the Allosaurus bit that guy on the head, and then we see the Allosaurus eating the guy off the bloomin' scooter. It's got 3 kills. It's like the Carnotaurus. They should have switched the Carno and the Allo there in that sequence. A tiny nitpick, but yeah. Now this is some real awesome actions, like Indiana Jones esque action sequence right here. Owen's on the bike trying to reach the plane before it takes off. The two Atrociraptors are coming up. It's nail bitingly close. This is just great. This is like what I want to see when I watch one of these movies in terms of action. Like this is so cool. So we just saw Kayla go, "Hold on tight." And I swear in the theatrical cut and the early cut I saw, there was a little bit more footage of her after that when she was like, "Hold on tight," and then it sort of lingered on her a bit more. And I'm glad they cut it down short because it felt a bit awkward. I remember. Now we get a nod here where the Atrociraptor falls out the back of the plane with the bike. I believe that's a slight homage to one of the early Jurassic Park free scripts where they had this bike sequence and this bike went over a cliff and a raptor was sort of on the bike holding it, and it kind of like had a visual look of like the raptor was riding the bike down the hill. I believe there's like storyboards out there for it. Um, and obviously they have a brief frame where the Atrociraptor looks like it's kind of riding the bike there before it kicks it away. And I swear that's a nod to that, because they really do, when they make these movies, they really do go into the archives of like the history and they retain ideas. And I believe that's partly why, and some Jurassic fans out there who have made it this far in the commentary, I don't know, some people might take issue with this, but I swear that is one of the reasons why Universal does hold back on a lot of like releasing deleted scenes and really diving into deep into the massive archives, because they like to hold on to certain things for potential future use. And as someone who's has done that extensively through my time working on these movies over the past decade, there was stuff in 2018 that we made that didn't see the light of day until 2022. Now it's shorter time between Jurassic Park 3 and this, but we only found out about the raptor on the bike thing, I think, just before the film came out. This film came out. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, we just saw this massive action sequence with Owen, Claire, and Malta. Then we cut back to Grant and Sattler, and they're getting a guided tour through the science labs. It's very Jurassic Park esque. They might as well be in the sort of hatchery in Jurassic Park right now. So here's an interesting thing, right? Ellie turns to Ramsey and says, "What about splicing DNA, making new creatures?" And Ramsey says to her, "Oh, we don't do that here. We like to think ourselves more evolved." Now you have to remember that Ramsey is the one who contacted Malcolm about the locust epidemic and knows that the locusts were hybrids. So he is not telling the truth to Ellie. Bear in mind, Ellie and Grant don't realize Ramsey is in on this at the moment. So Ramsey is playing a role here. And obviously, he has to say that because they're in the sort of public labs on the sort of higher levels where people can get guided tours, or at least, Ramsey is showing Grant and Sattler around this area, and with no worries about Dodson being angry or anything like that. So him saying that they don't do that splicing here, even though they have done with the locusts, is again, I think, great writing, building up this sort of mystique around Ramsey. Because again, at this point in the story, you're still meant to be under the illusion that he uh, is working for Dodson, and he is working for Dodson, but he's not. He's not. He's on Dodson's side, basically. And have a little sip of coffee before we get into the whole Charlotte Lockwood fiasco. So it was a long time coming, but I'm so glad that they finally had the on-screen uh, dialogue from Wu about adding monitor lizard DNA to Blue, because that proves that when he said to Masrani in Jurassic World, we've always used animals in the making of, other animals in the DNA of these animals. That links to that as well. It's just nice, and also to give some verbal acknowledgement to the differences between the raptors and the dinosaurs in general. So you see here, we see Site B in working order back in the day, which I think is just so cool to see, even though it's on like this old VHS thing, this old VHS footage from 1986, uh, with the Microceratus, which is again a link to the viral marketing website stuff that we did for DPG, because we had the InGen list and it said the first dinosaurs were cloned in 1986 on Site B, and Microceratops was one of them. So it was one of the dinosaurs that we listed. So it's nice to see that they actually did go into like the stuff that we wrote and then reflected that back on the big screen. A detail you can see here when we're meeting Charlotte Lockwood is that she's recording her vlogs in the labs that we saw in Fallen Kingdom. You can even see the cage in the background that Blue was kept in. And so the whole Charlotte Lockwood Maisie scenario, I'm not going to, I probably won't go into it now in this commentary because there's other stuff I want to talk about. I'm going to make a video where I address my thoughts about how that all went down. A more focused video, like a Jurassic Park misconception video. Oh, that's the door. Okay, I'll be back. Okay. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, package arrived. So, yes, a more focused video. I want to go into Maisie and Charlotte, but I think it's interesting that you can see that she's recording her vlogs from Lockwood's labs. So in 2007. So when Mills says the line, John Hammond was right. It was an unholy thing that you did. Um, it's not that Hammond specifically said what you've done is wrong because Hammond was dead at that point. It's more that they split over the idea of human cloning. Um, and Benjamin, when Mill says you did, it's like, well, he helped Charlotte achieve it by providing the labs and using InGen equipment, basically, because we see all the InGen equipment in the lower labs in Fallen Kingdom. But I'll make another video all about that. I think there's a lot of people out there say that it's like retconned, and there is some retconning, but it still works with Fallen Kingdom. Now, this is something I want to point out that just aesthetically, something I never thought I would ever see with a Jurassic movie is seeing Alan Grant and Ellie in these sort of biohazard outfits going to investigate these insects in this underground lab. It's just so awesome. It looks straight out of like the Andromeda strain or like some other Michael Crichton book, and this is where like the Crichton-esque feeling of this movie really pays off. And I think that he would have liked these movies. Obviously, I don't want to put words in a dead man's mouth, but if I had to have a bet, I bet he would have really appreciated where Colin took these stories in certain aspects. I think he might have taken some issue with some other stuff, uh, maybe the climate change stuff, but I don't know. It's just so awesome. Look at this, like Grant holding this giant locust. There's cell signaling between them. He says this is not good. So he's saying they're all communicating. It almost looked like the locust changed color there, like it's sort of flared up yellow a bit more when he was holding it. So yeah, basically, Mills said that Maisie's parents died in a car crash to Claire in Fallen Kingdom, and that was a lie. It wasn't the truth. So Mills was acting off of a lie that he was told from Lockwood, and Lockwood was, protecting Maisie and Charlotte. And so was Wu to a certain extent because he obviously had these vlogs in his possession, but he didn't show Mills the truth. Perhaps Wu didn't trust Mills with that information. So yeah, sort of look at this sequence. This is like Alan and Ellie's first action sequence, is getting away from these bugs that are biting and ripping their clothing. I just love the look of these labs, like this sort of the circular look to them with all this amberish. That's not a word, like amber color. Just this, the production design is so good in this movie, so visually appealing to me. And the whole Alan and Ellie getting back together thing, I like it, but there is that part of me that's like annoyed that her and Mark didn't work out, because Jurassic has this notion, this sort of like running gag almost, that divorce is a big thing in the story. And it would have just been nice to have at least one happy family uh, make it. And I know Owen and Claire and Maisie are the happy family at the end of this story, which is sweet. Obviously, it's a kind of weird family, but but we don't see like Owen and Claire get married or anything like that, which would have been nice. But well, unless they have wedding rings on, I haven't really noticed that before. But yeah, I'm a bit sad for Ellie and her Mark. They didn't work it out, because as annoying as it was to not see Grant and Ellie together in Jurassic Park 3, it was nice to at least see a family unit who seemed to be doing okay. But then we come to this movie and it's like, oh, it didn't end okay. So, but I like the Grant and Ellie get together, because obviously I like the idea that they should have been together after the first film and have kids. But anyway, we see Owen and Claire and Kayla are arriving, and Kayla's doing the whole Han Solo shtick. She's the Han Solo of this movie. You know, she's got her Millennium Falcon. She's got playing on the radio, being silly like Han Solo does. There is like a lot of Trevorrow's love of Star Wars is kind of imbued in this, and which I actually don't mind as someone who's sort of fallen out of love with Star Wars over the last few years. Obviously, I like the original trilogy, and so I appreciate where I can see the homages and the love for those movies, the inspiration, with like Kayla being like a Han Solo type character, the Malta sequence being a little bit like the cantina sequence in A New Hope, all that sort of stuff. I can appreciate that. I think it works in this, in building out the world building, and plus Kayla, she is like Han Solo, but she is different enough. You know how like the Millennium Falcon never gets destroyed fully, but in this one, her one just gets destroyed, like as we're seeing right now as the Quetzalcoatlus tears into it. That thing is huge. It's also telling in a way, I believe. You know, as soon as the aerial deterrent system goes off, the Quetzalcoatlus attacks. So on one hand, you can look at it like, oh, the Quetzalcoatlus is just a monster, you know, just attacking whatever. On another hand, you can look at it this way, that they are so under the sort of, they've got these chips in them that shock them or whatever, tells them not to attack things. Uh, as Alan Grant and Ellie discussed earlier with Ramsey, that as soon as that breaks, they're jaded and they're angry. Like they are. I don't know. It's like they're an animal that's just been tortured, and so as soon as it goes off, it sees a plane. It's like, oh, I just want to get it because it's pissed off. It's like this shot of Claire leaving the plane. Now, my wife pointed this out to me, and I do. I'm a bit torn on it, but like, there's the whole speech with Owen turning to Claire and saying, you should be the one to go find her. I love you. I'll see you later or whatever. And then she ejects. My wife was like, "Oh, I do wish it was kind of Claire who did find Maisie, um, on her own." Because they have that whole line at the beginning of the film where she's like, "You're not my mother. You can't tell me what to do or whatever." So there's kind of a little bit lost with the fact that when Maisie does eventually find Claire, um, or Claire doesn't find Maisie on her own, that kind of thing. So that there's no real massive payoff to that, ejecting from that plane. However, part of me does look at it in the way that I believe Colin wrote this sequence or this film, sorry, where, earlier on in the movie, she says, the only people I've been talking to are you both. That's what Maisie says. And it's like, it's actually the parents, the fact that both of them, if Maisie had seen Claire only, she would have, I don't know, they could have written a line like, where's Owen? And it's like, he's here too. But I guess the payoff is better for Maisie if she sees that both her parents, air quote parents, her new parents, are there together looking for her. I guess it is a bit more of an emotional payoff. But there is, yeah, I do kind of agree with my wife that I think it, they could have had a real moment between her and Claire had Claire found Maisie after, like, maybe the car with Alan Grant, Ellie, and Ian falls down the hill and Maisie is in the car or like shaken, and then a hand grabs her and pulls her out the car, and it's Claire just pulls her into an embrace. And then maybe Kayla and Owen turn up just before the Giga does, like they arrive and they have that moment. Little subtle changes I think maybe could have enhanced it, but I still like the film as it is a lot. And this sequence, I don't know anyone out there who doesn't like this sequence in this movie. And when we first saw this film, it was definitely the thing that made us go, this is the standout sort of one of the standout dinosaur sequences. So Claire's hanging in the tree, trapped in the chair from her ejection from Kayla's plane, and then the Therizinosaurus comes strolling up, and it's like got extremely poor eyesight. If not, it might be completely blind. It just looks so real. It's huge. I just love the look of this. This forest just looks so primordial. It looks more primordial than anything we've seen before in any of these movies. Like, it really does almost look like that they've traveled back in time. And the sound design on this dinosaur, just so cool. I love you can like hear everything like echoing through the forest, and almost it's almost like the sounds is ricocheting off all the tree trunks. They always have that noise. It happened a minute ago, but in the sound design, they had that noise go through the forest. It was like, and I don't know if that was from the Therizinosaurus or whether it was just, other sounds echoing, but it gives such a great atmosphere to this place. It's all like she's going into the muddy water, and it's kind of like something out of Apocalypse Now or something. it's just such a cool visual of like this thing sniffing the water looking for her, but can't find her. And that's going to do this like huge roar. There you go, right above her head. I mean, this is just all kick ass stuff. Now, a little detail I want to point out here. Again, talking back to like the wristband thing with Thunderbirds, like the way the Therizinosaurus is walking off now with its hands pointing backwards, just dragging its claws through the leaves, really reminds me of Edward Scissorhands when he is in a mood. And there's one bit in the film he walks through this corridor in the house. And he's just scratching the walls of the corridor. And as a kid, I really loved that visual. So seeing the Therizinosaurus do that, I kind of thing, I was like, I love that. I love the way it's walking, like dragging its claws through the through the ferns and stuff. It's like it's almost in a bad mood. and I just love it. And that's another like one of those things that I'll watch and it takes me back to my childhood in a way that I just don't expect, which makes me love watching these movies. Now, yes, okay, I just praised it. I'm now going to bring some negativity. This might be one of the sequences that I would want to tweak the most. For one, these characters aren't wet, and when they crash, the windshield of the plane smashed in. Like her hair is perfect curls. She looks too good. There's no cuts, no bruises, nothing like that on them. Like they needed to come out of this plane a little bit more shaken than they look. I will admit perfectly that that is something that irritates me about this sequence. Obviously, they need like I just think she could have had some sort of like maybe some jacket or some coats or something in the back of her plane, and when they get out, you know, they look a bit rough on the head and hair, and they come out wearing these sort of jackets to keep warm. That would have been a bit better. And maybe when Owen, you know, crashes through the ice running from the Pyroraptor, as we're about to see, that's when he loses the jacket potentially. Um, like he takes it off to swim better or whatever. But they just needed to come out of the plane just a little bit more damaged than they are. Um, but saying that in Jurassic Park 3, the characters all survive perfectly and come out looking pretty good from a, several plane crashes in that movie, because it not only crashes into the trees but it also smashes to the ground and then it gets rolled around by the Spinosaurus and no one gets a broken arm or anything like that. So these movies have a tendency for doing that kind of thing. So I'm not going to hold it against it too much, but it would have been nice to at least see him wet. Wet would have been better because you can at least say maybe if they got a cut, the blood washed away. But anyway, I love the idea of this Pyroraptor swimming. I mean, it's just so out of left field, and it's kind of like the Dilophosaurus with the frill sequence in Jurassic Park. It's like this dinosaur doing something that you don't expect. See how they look now, right? How they look now is kind of like how they should have come out of the plane, or at least Kayla maybe needed her hair a little bit wet, a little bit more wet. It's also nice to see that a dinosaur is outside the sanctuary, so you know, even Biosyn with all their like, you know, to quote, control over this whole situation, you know, life finds a way. There's still creatures that are out just outside their facility. Unless perhaps this lake is part of the Biosyn sanctuary and that is just where the Pyroraptor lives, but I can't imagine there's much food up there, so either way, is I just like the fact that it's there. There's a lot of intrigue around that animal. So yeah, exactly how we're looking at these characters now, right? They look a bit sodden, shaken. That's how they should have come out of the plane. That Jeffrey guy just made Dodson jump by tapping on the glass. He's like, "What? Oh God!" Like Jeffrey, this side character. I did say to Colin, I kind of wish he was like eaten by the Giganotosaurus. Not that Jeffrey did necessarily anything wrong, but well, I mean, he kind of did, helping Dodson turn off the aerial defense system and whatnot. But yeah, he kind of needed to be eaten. He looked like fodder for the dinosaurs. Now, again, I must emphasize seeing Alan Grant and Ellie in a Hyperloop train is not something I ever would have expected from the Jurassic movies, but seeing it, I love it. I think it's great. It's like you got to have your cool vehicles in Jurassic, and a Hyperloop tunnel at Biosyn Sanctuary is something I personally never would have thought of in a million years. But I think it's the cleverness of Trevorrow and his mind seeing these movies. Um, he's obviously looked at Jurassic World, and they had like the monorail, and that was above ground. And then you go to Biosyn, it's like this isn't a park, it's a sanctuary. They're researching dinosaurs there. They're looking after them, but they need to navigate around to these outposts. So they have it's not a monorail, but it's an underground hyperloop tunnel. So it's just a really clever way of like linking back to past iconography in these movies, and yet doing it completely new and different, and giving it a different air air to it, air to the whole thing. So now we see Dodson shutting down their hyperloop train. And so Dodson turned off the ADS. He ordered it, and Jeffrey did it. So he's and with Sonia Santos, he's actively tried to kill Owen and Claire twice. So he's tried to get them killed twice, and now he's personally tried to get uh, Alan Grant and Ellie killed in the mines as well. Like he specifically stopped them there because he knows what's in the mines. And we know he knows what's in the mines because we see a human skull in here. So he knows that the mines are, not a good place anymore. I love this. This is part of like one of the extra scenes they added in the extended cut of like Grant saying that, you need Ellie. He said, Dr. Sadler here is a good person in a tight spot, and this is a tight spot, which is, obviously could be linking back to Jurassic Park when she went to go turn the power on. But it's also could be very easily looked at as Grant remembering when he called Ellie when he was almost drowning on Site B, and he called her and was like, Site B, the river, and then she called. Well, she contacted Mark, her husband, who contacted what is it? What's his face? The Costa Rican government and the Navy, U.S. Navy, to come and rescue Grant and the others off the island. So now this might be my favorite character interaction in the whole movie between Malcolm and Dodson. It was such a cushy gig. I love Malcolm's speech here. It's so cool. So there you go. Dodson's like, wow, this day, like he knows what he's done by stopping that pod in that mine. I do wish they cut out that line about that kid going, dinosaurs are everywhere, genetically speaking. I don't even think that because I think he's part of the duo of the guy who played the barista, and it's like this scene is more, it would play better if they just removed that. I think just that's the tiny little nitpick there. I just love the writing around this. A cachet to this joint. This is how they get you. They give you so many promotions in such a short period of time. They bludgeons your capacity for critical thinking. It's so good. Malcolm just looks so cool. You imagine unchecked errors. That's what you find. You envision what an evil, unbound Prometheus. I've got the subtitles on, so that's what I am to you. And he's like, Prometheus got gored, and so we, you rapacious rat bastard. It's like such good lines. It's almost like I would argue it's like Malcolm. This is like Lost World Malcolm. You know, when Malcolm was going after Ludlow, when we first introduced to Ludlow actually. But then in this one, he's a little bit more confrontational. We just saw Dodson look at a screen and we see all the things that are going wrong. You know, Maisie and Beta are lost in the power station, which is what he believes Maisie's there. There's Kayla and Owen's plane has crashed into the lake, and the pod has been stopped in the mines for Alan and Grant and Ellie Sattler. So there's a lot going on for Dodson on this day. And now we see Owen and Kayla spotting the T Rex coming out of the mist. So we haven't seen the T Rex since the very opening. So here it is, looking amazing as always. And I love the sound design on this bit when it's like sniffing this deer, pushing it around, and it's kind of like again seeing this dinosaur just sort of like out in the wild. You know, they're trapped in this sort of like prehistoric bubble with this thing. And then here comes the Giga, which is just so cool. And then you see this fight. And I love that this fight is so short and it's so like animalistic. It feels really grounded and real. Like the Giganotosaurus in this movie is like the complete opposite to the Indominus Rex. You know, the Indominus Rex was this like hybrid monster, hyper intelligent. Was trying to work out where it fits in the food chain, so it's just killing everything it comes across, and it was murderous, just killing everything. Whereas the Giga is just an animal and just going about its business, and it's like the apex of this place. So it just asserts its dominance by bumping with its head and just lounging around sleeping. It's like it doesn't really need to do much else. It's like really interesting. It's like if you had I don't know, like a certain stretch of ocean where there was only a great white in it and nothing else that would pose a threat to it. It would just, eat and go around and not do much else. That's what it reminds me of, and I really like that. I do. Part of me does wish, as I said earlier, that the Giganotosaurus got to eat a human. Would have been nice to have seen that. Um, but I like what they've kind of done with that dinosaur character. Was to make a point because we just had like the Endoraptor and the Indominus in the past two movies, which are the monsters, and then the new sort of air quotes big bad in this movie, appears on the face of it to be the Giganotosaurus, but it's actually not. It's these hybrid locusts and Dodson, really. Now we're coming up to uh, possibly my favorite sequence that they added in to the extended version, which I wish they'd kept in the theatrical one, um, which is Dodson. deleting the files for the locusts, and he comes down into this server room and he starts manually deleting hard drives for hexapod allies. And then we see Ramsey comes up behind him and they start having this exchange because Ramsey's like, you did send a team to go rescue Grant and Sattler. And then he's like confronting him about deleting research files. And they have this back and forth, which one of the reasons I really like this is I think it taps into the kind of Spielberg-esque dialogue structure where you have characters talking over one another in a very naturalistic way. And oddly enough, if you really pay attention, you can hear both what they're saying simultaneously. And it happens in this briefly in a minute. You'll see. I mean, I've got the subtitles on, so I'm going to be really interested in which one they highlight. Yeah, there you go. Henry's on it. No one cared about much. About the food supply, vegetable collapse. Find the girl. Change the locust DNA. Yeah, the subtitles had it all on the screen. That's quite good. Yeah, kind of like characters talking over one another. If this feels very much like a scene from one of the older films in the way the characters are just talking to one another. It also reveals why they made the locust to begin with, which why this scene was cut from the theatrical version, I have no idea. But it was actually to show that they were trying to do something kind of good with the locusts, but then it went south. But then obviously Dodson um, tried to exploit it. Very Indiana Jones esque look to this sequence with Grant with that is that a wrench with fire on the end of it? And it's cool to have a sequence in a mine, an amber mine, which kind of brings the story full circle as well. We never had an action sequence in the very place where dinosaur DNA was being extracted, so it's nice to have that kind of uh, what is a subtext running through it. And then we meet the Dimetrodon. Dimetrodons in this are very old school looking, and I like that. And I swear this whole sequence is a homage to Journey to the Center of the Earth, because in that story, they go through mines, they go to the center of the Earth, and there's a whole sequence where in one of the older films, at least I can't remember if it's in the book. I'll have to look it up afterwards to double check, but in at least in the old Journey to the Center of the Earth movie, they get attacked by a load of Dimetrodons. So I feel like that this sequence is looking back at because we had Valley of Gwangi being homaged at the beginning. There's a lot of old school movies. They reference Talos in the Malta sequence on one of the boats, and so there's a lot of like looking back at old movies, monster movies, and all that, and then paying lip service to them. And so I feel like this whole sequence of being in the amber mines with Dimetrodons is like a nod to Journey to the Center of the Earth. I love this. You know, oh, Malcolm's trying to work out, the numbers. The question is, I've never really got. Did he actually write in the right numbers? Because I know Ramsey unlocks the door, but is it that Malcolm? I've never clocked exactly this. There's Grant kicking the Dimetrodon, but yeah, I've never worked out whether he actually works it out. I guess no, he didn't actually press the same numbers. So maybe Malcolm's under the illusion that he did that. I guess that's the point, isn't it? That Malcolm thinks he like it's like adding to Malcolm's ego. So now we see Maisie has joined all the original three legacy characters. Now Claire has found this outpost. This outpost design is really cool. It's I don't know why, and I don't think I'm not really thinking of anything necessarily in particular from sort of the Lost Worlds concept design phase, but it reminds me of something you would see in that, like concept designs for like the High Hide or something. It reminds me of that, but I can't remember specifically why. You know, Claire's being stalked by all these Dilophosauruses. It is nice to see the Dilophosauruses back again. And I am, fans who are listening to this will know what I'm about to say next, probably, but I do wish that they had augmented the animatronics a bit with CGI because I get the sentiment that Colin was going for in like we only ever saw the Dilophosauruses in animatronic in the first one, so he wanted to do that again for this new one. But my personal taste is, you know, make it look real, as real as possible. So having some CGI touch ups to make those Dilophosauruses look even more convincing, I think would have only benefited the movie. Having them look like puppets as they do, not necessarily the best. But that doesn't mean I don't like what they did with them. I like that Owen comes up and grabs one by the throat and it like drools all the venom out of his mouth, and it's like he knows how to handle them. Again, leaning into his animal that he's an animal behaviorist and he worked at the park. He knows how these animals act and how to handle them, and it's a show don't tell kind of thing with Owen. Sort of these flamethrower things. Like he had this all set up. Like he knew if I wanted to ever ditch this, just press this button and boom, just flamethrower, just burn everything, burn the evidence. And just this visual imagery is so awesome. Just not, again, not what I was expecting from a Jurassic movie when I was, told where this was going. I was like, wow, this is going to be so different and so interesting. And then they break out, and you have this view from outside the facility, and this just looks so apocalyptic. See here all the dinosaurs reacting to these locusts falling, and the Giga just walking through the forest. So the irony in this whole situation for Dodson is through him burning the evidence, him trying to get rid of, you know, what he's done leads to his undoing. Because had he not burnt the locusts, um, they wouldn't need to evacuate, and maybe he could have found another way of stopping these guys from leaving. Through burning the locust, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, basically, and thus he has to evacuate, and he then gets into the hyperloop tunnel to escape, and thus meets his end with the Dilophosaurus. So he's kind of not solely, but he's kind of one of the biggest factors in his own undoing, is trying to not face up to the responsibilities of what he's done and admit it to the world. And this is the moment fans like myself were waiting for, the meeting of the old and the new. Which I think was so cleverly done with these movies. They didn't get Alan Grant and everyone back in the first Jurassic World and have them get the torch passed over to them straight away. They built a whole new set of characters to fall in love with and reshaped the world and wove in the old over time. So when you actually get to this point, I think it's a much better payoff than had we seen Grant and Ellie and everyone from the beginning. It's because it makes them more believable. Like how they got involved in this situation and why they're along for the ride, should I say? Because so much has changed since we last saw them that now it's much more convincing that they'd even be roped into an adventure like this. And now everyone's concerned. They feel the ground rumbling. So this is where you'd want. They hear a rumble and they're like, "Oh God, don't move!" And then you see a car pull up and Jeffrey gets out and he's like angry because he said, yeah, I saw you and Malcolm leaving on one of the security cameras, and so I'm here to bring you in," or something like that. And then he realized, like, what the hell's going on here? And then the Giganotosaurus walks out, and then Jeffrey gets eaten. That's what should have happened. Although Jeffrey's still alive after this bit, actually, so that wouldn't work. Or just some park worker or something. I don't know. I do love how though the Giga's behavior is way more slow and methodical. It's stalking, like it just it's curious about what's going on. There's a lot going on. There's fire everywhere. It's found all these people. And notice how it goes for Maisie because she's obviously separated from the others, so it's the easy prey, but she's luckily trapped in this sort of cage around the stairs, which again, going back to like the Lost World concepts, I swear this is kind of like a nod to the I can't remember what they called it now, but it was like this sort of coffin shaped thing that a human was meant to get in, and then in case of a dinosaur attack, and they released it with the bull T Rex toy, and you could swallow a person in it. It kind of reminds me of that. I feel like they tapped into that kind of stuff. Now, here's the moment we all thought Malcolm was going to bite the dust. We thought Malcolm was going to go out. And for any fan out there who says that this film had no tension or stakes, I bet you were thinking Malcolm was going to die in this sequence. So you had the tension was there, at least on the first viewing. That's awesome. Breathes fire. Malcolm's a hero. He's a badass. That's why he lives. I also feel like this is, in a kind of petty way, I'm only thinking about this right now, but like, you know how everyone with the new Star Wars trilogy, like they killed off all the old characters and yet they never shared the screen together. I feel like that Trevorrow, because obviously he got axed from working on one of the Star Wars films, which is why I think he introduced some Star Wars ness into this. And he had specifically that shot in the trailer, in the final film, of like all the characters are there together on screen, the classic characters, as kind of a, middle finger to Disney. I kind of get the sense that one of the reasons why, Malcolm didn't die there and why all these characters survive these ordeals is because it's like another middle finger to Disney. The classic music comes in. That is really cool. But yeah, I do kind of wish that there was another character just appear to try and stop them or something, and then gets eaten by the Giga. That would have made that scene just that extra little bit cool, and you would have seen there's Jeffrey. So maybe they could have like ADR'd Dodson going, "Where's Jeffrey?" And then someone just shakes their head, and he's like, "Oh," and then he gets angry. So now they're calling all the dinosaurs back to the main hub. And I like to see, because you can see the dinosaurs are like shaking their heads, and they're like, some of them are like trying to resist it. Part of me feels like that, when Ramsey was talking in the helicopter, and he's like, they send a signal to the brain, and then Grant's like, what, like shocks? And he's like, no, like a signal. And then they're like, doesn't that seem kind of cruel? And then he's like, and then Ramsey says, do you know how much voltage were in the fences at Jurassic Park? And then Grant says, yeah. It's like, so Ramsey was almost admitting right there, yeah, it is electricity. But obviously Ramsey is trying to play a role in front of Grant and Ellie, so no one can suspect what's actually going on with him and Malcolm trying to sabotage Biosyn. So like, I know there's lots of people out there who'll be like, yeah, but they answered it in Camp Cretaceous. It's like, I don't consider Camp Cretaceous canon, so I'm working off of what the film uh talks to me about. So these signals in the brain are shocks. They are electric shocks that will force the animal, like a invisible fencing system, force the animal to go where they want it to go. It's not like they could fist bump a dinosaur like they do in Camp Cretaceous, or play it like a bloody video game. I just love all these character interactions. Easy, Rambo. And it is cool to see that, like, I know we're past it now, but like Owen Grady was saying to Alan, like, I was a fan of your books. We'll book on tape. Um, to show that like Owen probably got his research for the Raptors from Grant, like listening to Grant's research. As the old Barbasol can. Again, showing that, at some point Dodson went back to get his research to clear up his mess. Yeah, this is where Ramsey reveals that he was the one behind it all. And it's kind of like, what goes around comes around to Dodson. You did this to John Hammond back in the day, now it's happening to you all these years later. And I think Dodson in this movie is he is an evolution of the character we saw in Jurassic Park. I've heard some people say that they don't see it, but I do. I think that he's in the first film he is, he's trying to be covert. He's got the shades and the glasses on, which Nedry makes a comment about. He knows what they're doing is wrong, but he's willing to put people in harm's way in order to get what he wants. And he's not overly shouty or anything like that. Like you get the sense he's kind of nervous, and then I get that from Dodson in this movie. But obviously, we're many many years later. People grow more confident and stuff over the years, so he will have some differences, and plus we see a lot more of him than what we ever did in the short scene in the first movie. Um, and so I can believe it that it's the same guy. Malcolm. And he gave her a name. How about that? I just think they nailed all the interactions between all the characters in this whole like sort of climactic sequence where they're finally all together. Dodson trying to make his escape. It says Biosyn's Transport Division Genetics Hyperloop. Oh, Biosyn Genetics Transport Division Hyperloop. Again, the novelty, I think, for myself, it's not that it's worn off, but I get reminded of it. That for ages we were waiting to see these characters interact for years, and we didn't know how they were going to interact or how they were going to play off of each other. And so to see watching this back, like to see Ellie Sattler and Claire Deering together in a scene, and they're talking about bad dreams, and what you should do is focus on the now, all that kind of thing. It's just really nice to see, and the fact that they have to go turn the power, and this is obviously a sort of recontextualized uh, play on Ellie having to go down into the basement to turn the power on in the first film. Um, but obviously, there wasn't giant locusts in that, and she wasn't with someone else. Well, she thought she was with Arnold at one point, but it is nice to just see these kind of like mini side quests they have to do in order to get out of there, which is what they had to do in like the other movies. It's very, very Jurassic. Yeah, with Malcolm on the radio and everything, it's definitely just like the first film. Not the green button. Obviously, we're intercutting with Owen, Maisie, and Grant going to find Beta down in the, I guess, the power station area of the facility. And Grant did mention a minute ago, like that, we used to think that they would, the raptors would just, eat you while you're alive and all that sort of stuff. But now we know that they're smart enough to go for the throat to like kill you, so they're like lions. I just think that's a really interesting piece of information to show that even his like knowledge of these dinosaurs has evolved since we last saw him. Maisie's just jumped forward to try and utilize Owen's strategy. You put your hand forward so the finger and your thumb makes an L shape, so looks like a mouth, and then your eye is right there. So the dinosaur kind of like focuses on your eye. They never really explain it fully on screen, but there is a behind the scenes video clip of Chris Pratt describing the logic behind the whole hand thing. And it's really cool world building. And I do kind of like that they never explain it, but you can kind of visually see it. And going all the way back to the beginning of the movie where Owen was saying, like, don't let Blue let you know that you're scared. You know, Maisie isn't scared of Beta. Owen isn't scared of Beta, but Grant, obviously, he has a history of raptors. He's a bit more on edge. He hasn't seen one since Jurassic Park 3 in the flesh. That's why Beta goes for him. Just an interesting little detail there. You've got Hilly Grant and Claire Deering battling these giant locusts with tasers as they try and, redistribute the power to the aerial defense system. A bit more coffee. And they've redistributed the power. So the interesting thing is like the aerial defense system means that the dinosaurs or the flying reptiles, should I say, don't fly away. I guess they're like nested there or something. And now we see Dodson trying to make his escape through the tunnels. One of the things some of the fans questioned is like, how did the Dilophosauruses get into these tunnels? Well, I assume they got in through the smashed up outpost that the characters, um, you know, Owen, Claire, Grant, and everyone went in because they, after going down this like ladder system, they go into one of the hyperloop tunnels to get to the main hub. Where Malcolm talks about his dog humping his leg, and we saw the Dilophosaurus around that outpost. So I just assumed that the Dilophosaurus got in through there, and we're now wandering the tunnels underground. This is pretty terrifying use of the lighting going up and down. I do like the detail that the Dilophosaurus's frills are like flat to their neck there. Sometimes people depict them and their neck frills are like flopping down or whatever. I really like this detail of hearing Dodson's voice over the elevator audio system because I think it's like a nod back to the novel. You know, when Hammond dies, I believe my memories are serving me correct. In the novel, it cuts back from Hammond's death to hearing Hammond's voice over the tannoy saying like "Welcome to Jurassic Park," and here we blah 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 blah, and they do the same thing with Dodson here. Just a nice little detail. Now we see the whole group meeting back up, and slinking out from the shadows comes Henry Wu. Now, obviously, a lot of fans, myself included, actually, before Colin told us his plans for the movie, but I assumed, like everyone else, that Wu was going to die. You know, he was going to get his comeuppance because he dies in the book. But obviously, the movies sort of deviate from who lives and dies, and in the novels. And so I actually really like how they gave Wu this sort of redemptive sort of arc, and especially with like how they end the movie with that shot of him in the field. Again, I must mention that was something that I didn't expect to see in a Jurassic movie, but I really enjoyed the visuals. And considering, Michael Crichton's whole um, dragon curve picture that appears on like the iteration pages of the first book, like when the locusts go into the air and start swirling around, they sort of remind me of that. And we've just gone past it, but that like gag about there's a dinosaur on your shoulder. This always gets me. I think that's really good. They're like my Malcolm lines that I really enjoy. Now, what's interesting here is I'm with a lot of other fans who say that you know getting a sense of the geography of this place and how many dinosaurs fit in here and what's going on. They obviously just don't show that because they just leave it up to your interpretation, I guess. But it would be nice to kind of get some kind of extra visual key of like where the brachiosauruses are, where all the well, I guess the brachiosauruses are still out in the lake, I guess, because they were spotted. You see the helicopter flying over and all the smoke is clearing. We'll see it in a minute. There's the T Rex arriving, making the logo in the fountain. It's so cool. I really love the sense of weight that you can feel with the T Rex and Giga in this scene, and the Therizinosaurus. Really slow moving like a tank. Yeah, they just needed to be a little bit more, I think, of maybe some establishing shot or something of the geography of this place and where all the dinosaurs are in relation to one another. Like, as it stands right now, it makes out like the Therizinosaurus is, I guess, sleeping or lying somewhere near here through all this. I do really, really enjoy this fight. I think it's really cool. The only thing I have to nitpick about this fight is maybe it could have just been a little bit brighter in lighting. Like, I think the lighting is a little bit too dark. I do like the spotlight of the helicopter coming in and, you know, making this scenario seem even more erratic. But yeah, it could have been a bit more lighter. As we see here when the T Rex comes down, the light goes over the Giga and you can see all the patterns. It's like tail and back and that. And I like that the Giga is not exactly, um, just grey as a lot of people depict it. It's actually got a lot of patterning on it. It's just always down to lighting in these movies. And see, here's the Therizinosaurus, which looks like it was coming up from a sort of sleeping position, maybe even drinking actually, which would make a little bit more sense. Now we get to see a a rare moment in these movies, which is a herbivore fighting a carnivore. This is so cool. You see, like the Giga bites one of the claws off its hand, and this Tyrannosaur is knocked unconscious. And you see this in the extended edition. We just saw it there, like this flicker and kind of reminiscent of the opening of the movie. It's sort of like up for your interpretation whether the T Rex is remembering this battle from before, which wouldn't make sense if it died. It can't remember if it's dead. So I like to think it just is sort of more for the audience. It's very subtly done. And there we see the Giga bites the dust at the hands, literally at the hands of the Therizinosaurus. This awesome shot of them roaring at each other. And the characters exit in the helicopter to a twinkly piano of the Jurassic Park theme, just like the first film. would have been nice to see kind of like the T-Rex and Therizinosaurus, like uh maybe the T-Rex has like a snap towards it and the Therizinosaurus like sniffs the air, backs off and walks away or something, just to show that like it doesn't want to fight anymore. See them sort of clear up their differences. But again, that's like a nitpick. And this is the moment where Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler finally get together and have a big old smoochy kiss. I remember people cheering when I saw this in the cinema in America. You don't really get that sort of stuff in British cinemas, but it was quite nice to hear. And then I absolutely love this moment, this character moment right here. Maisie getting her hand fixed, and she's just looking over at Owen and Claire, and they look over at her, and there's no words spoken. Just you can tell by her face that she sees them as her parents, even though they're not. And it's just a lovely character moment. And this is the last time we see Ian Malcolm on screen, when with Grant putting his hand on Malcolm's back, showing that they are good friends. See, there's this Brachiosaurus in the lake, and there's their helicopter. You can see the smoke from the fire. So it's either the dinosaurs were let back out of their um, confinement in the building, which obviously they would have eventually, or the Brachiosaurus never went in, like they weren't chipped for that thing. Um, but yeah, that alludes to like a bit more of the like establishing a bit of the geography around what was going on with those dinosaurs going back to the building. It could have been a little bit more clearer. And there's Alan and Ellie going off to give their spiel to Congress about all what's happened. And now we cut to Wu in the field, and it's such a cool little scene for Wu's character. I think the only difference, and I will say this, the only difference I would have made in this is have some police cars in the background. It's like he's been allowed to do this to sort of stop this epidemic of these locusts, but he's got a police presence because of his involvement in a lot of the things that go on in the past. Like he is in trouble, there is some repercussions. And now we see the Tyrannosaur meeting two other Tyrannosaurs who are from Sauna. And then we cut to Kayla buying a new plane. She spray paints number 2 on it. See, I'm personally, I'd be up for seeing more of Kayla Watts because she's got a plane, so she can globetrot and go on adventures. Um, I think she would need to team up with some kind of dinosaur expert, though. Not that she isn't knowledgeable, because she knows what the Giganotosaurus is and that, but you need your dinosaur expert. And she has the plane, yeah. She can like globetrot and go on different adventures. And here's Blue reuniting with Beta, which is a nice little scene. That's very adorable seeing Beta run up to Blue and give her all the love and whatever appreciation that they've found each other again. But I think that this could have been handled really, really cheesily, but in my opinion, I think it's handled really well. Is when Blue comes back. We're going to see it in a second. When Blue comes back and just looks at Owen one more time, and Owen looks at her, and it's like the closure of their story. It's almost like Blue's coming back to make sure he's okay. or to say thank you, which is nice. And it shows Blue's intelligence. And Owen's reaction is like he didn't expect that. So he's like, wow. Like you can see in his face, he's like, wow, that's something else. I think it's very tastefully done how they've done the whole over this trilogy, how they've done Blue as like this anomaly, and she's got this relationship with Owen that no other dinosaur has with anyone anywhere, or no human has anywhere. And here is Charlotte giving the spiel. She says we're part of a fragile system. If we're going to survive, we have to trust each other. That's the important line there. Depend on each other, coexist. So she's talking when she says that she's talking about this over Owen, Claire, and Maisie, which is what they've learned over this movie is to learn to coexist together and be a family. And then we see this montage of all these different dinosaurs alongside sort of modern day animals. And I think it's there's a lot of fans out there who interpreted this ending as like a happy ending. And whilst they don't show any carnage in this ending, because they obviously want to end on a sort of more of an uplifting note, because this is the end of the trilogy, or the saga, should I say, the six movies. Cutting to like someone being eaten by a dinosaur would be a bit of a dark note to end on. Although there would be people out there who would think that would be kind of cool. I think that Charlotte's words about, if we're to survive, we have to learn to coexist. It's like the obviously the ending is very similar to the opening of the movie in terms of the world building, but it's not necessarily a good thing. It's like an ongoing thing. Like as Mills puts it, it's all out of the box, so there is literally nothing that can be done to put it back in. People are going to make their own animals, all this sort of stuff. It's going to go on forever unless there's some catastrophic change that is, I don't know what could happen. But uh, so I do take a little bit of issue when people say, "Oh, it's a solely a good ending." It's like, well, it's not exactly. To me, it's like the same as like the ending of the Lost World. Some people out there will tend to say that that's a really good ending, where a good as in like good for the characters of that world. I mean, it is a good ending of a movie, um, for us, the audience, but for the people in the universe, it's like Hammond is making the plea on the news, to leave the islands alone, but it's not set in stone, and we see like the island with the dinosaurs on it, but it's like an open ending in terms of like now the public have just found out this island of dinosaurs exists, and then Hammond's going, we need to leave it alone, and then that's where the film ends. We don't know if they actually leave it alone, and anything like that until we get to Jurassic Park 3, where we learn that even though the island's restricted, people still go there. People, and we see people are still obsessed with those islands because they can't stop asking questions about them to Grant. So much intrigue around those islands, and even a character admits that they don't even know what to do with those islands yet, and they haven't fully made a decision. So yeah, I feel like this ending's kind of like that. It for the characters, the human characters, and I guess like the dinosaur characters, like Blue and the Tyrannosaur, if you want to count her as a character. Um, they have their endings where you could this is where the story could end, and it's kind of like that said and done, the saga. I personally, I don't know if we'll ever see Grant, Malcolm, or Ellie, or Owen, or Claire again. um I don't even know if we'll see Maisie. Maybe they'll obviously, if they do continue this series of movies, then they'll definitely have maybe references to them. I can imagine maybe one or two cameos from characters, but I don't see it being like this, where they're like main characters. Um, but yeah, and I say this most of the time, if they don't make any more movies after this, as a fan, I'm happy. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased towards the world movies because I got to help market them and work on the canon and all that sort of stuff. But as a fan, like watching these, I'm so chuffed with what they've done, and I really love this new trilogy. There's a lot to chew over, and yeah, I just really appreciate that they're out there and that I can watch them. And anyway, I'll stop waffling. I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to me talk about Jurassic World Dominion, the extended edition, the actual version of the movie that I would consider canon. Um, the theatrical version of this movie I don't consider canon because I only watch the extended one now. So um, yeah, but there's not much difference really in them in terms of like what they achieve story wise. It's just more, extra stuff. Except the main point is like learning about how Dodson why he made the locusts in the first place. Anyway, right. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Please hit subscribe, like, all that jazz, and I'll see you in the future. Bye bye.